Hello and welcome to PPM Podcast for the year 2020. Hard to believe we'd be sitting here in 2020 talking about CPR and first aid, but we are. So here's some things to go over. Some of these things are reviews for those folks that have watched the podcast or our newsletter in the past. Some of these things will be reviews for you, and I apologize up front for that, but for those that have not been watching the podcast, then this is for you, okay? First of all, when we set up a monitor, and we are doing monitors now, remember that's required by the American Heart Association that we watch your class. Being able to do it via Skype or FaceTime is quite an advantage for you so that you don't have to physically come in here in order to do a class so that we can watch. Many of the other training centers require you to teach for them at no cost. We don't do that. Okay, so you teach your own classes, whatever, but we need to watch one of those classes. When do we need to do that? Well, it needs to be done sometime during your certification. So your certs are good for 2 years. Sometime during that 2 years, within that 2 years, we need to watch your class. So that means do not wait to the last 30 seconds of the month and then decide, oh my God, wait, I haven't been monitored. It's not how this works, because we may not be able to get you monitored in time, and then you will expire. Okay? So don't do that. Just let us know well in advance. Get it done. The earlier you get it done, the better off you are, so we can report that your monitor's been completed and you're set to go. What are we looking for in a monitor? Because this seems to be a question that keeps coming up. I'm looking, just as if I signed up for your class, I prefer it to be a BLS class if you are a BLS instructor, because that lets me see all the different aspects of the class. So pretend I'm sitting there, I just signed up for your class, and I'm taking your class. Okay, so that means your intro, your presentation, all the information you're going to hand out, my skills, adult, child, infant, okay, bag valve mask, AED trainer, choking procedures. Everything has to be covered, just like it's a real class. Okay, now that's kind of obvious, and one would think that, why am I even saying that? Because we get people that show up and they're set for their monitor and they go, well, what am I supposed to do? And they don't have any of their equipment there, or they don't have their bag valve mask, they don't have an AED trainer. It's like, well, then why did you schedule a monitor and you don't even have the equipment to do the class? So a lot of our training center faculty people will begin to ask you, let me see the equipment before we get started. Let me see that you got your bag valve. Let me see you got your AED. Let me see you got your... Otherwise, we're well into the presentation and all of a sudden we realize you can't complete the class. So expect that we may actually check equipment first before we get started. Didn't think I'd have to say that, because common sense would tell you if you're teaching a class, you got to have all your equipment. Okay, what some other things that are happening. Memberships are being sent out. The invoices have been sent. Some of you have already paid in the past. If you paid in the past, then that becomes your annual membership dues date. So that every year you'll be billed roughly that same month, not necessarily the same date, but that same month. So if you paid December of this year, you're good until December of next year. Actually, December of last year, December of this year. So again, 1 year from the time you paid, a new invoice will go out in reference to your dues. And I think I worked it out on paper. Those dues end up being something like $4 a month to be a member. So it's cheaper than almost anybody else, certainly cheaper than even going to Starbucks getting a couple cups of coffee. Should not be an issue. Okay, one of the things I'm seeing a problem with, and although it's okay to do this, but not okay in other ways. You know, the requirement for mannequins is that you have an adult mannequin and you have a baby mannequin. Okay, you don't have to have a child mannequin. So you can use the adult mannequin as a child. Since they're relatively small, you can do the one-handed compressions on the adult mannequin so it plays the part as a child. Now, here's where the problem comes in. It is now a child, which means you need to use a child bag valve mask, not an adult. Your ratio shifts to 15:2 on two-person because they are a child. Two-person CPR on a child, 15:2. It's kind of distracting, and I'm realizing it when I'm watching some of these monitors, the fact that you just did the adult mannequin, everybody's practiced, everybody's done good, and now you're using that same mannequin as the child, the students are getting kind of confused as to they're doing the 30:2 because they just did 30:2 on that mannequin. And we've got to say, wait a minute, that was 30 and 2. This is now a child, correct? If it's a child, it's now 15 and 2. So it gets kind of confusing. Again, they're using the adult bag valve mask instead of the child BVM. And again, if you don't have the right size BVM, go back to mouth or mouth to mask. Okay, those two work. So that's become a real problem. We're seeing 2 hands on the child mannequin, which is okay if the child mannequin's big enough. And again, it gets confusing with that adult mannequin sitting there. So think about getting yourself a child mannequin, because I think it will make a difference in your training programs. Or you have to really be conscious of that fact and point out to your student, hey, listen, although this is still the adult mannequin, we're playing this as a child, and these are the child procedures. Okay? Enough said about that. Let's see what is the other interesting things we have here. Okay, when we do schedule, or you schedule, you need to be there. You need to show up. We've got an instructor that's actually taking their time, and they're being paid for it, to monitor your class. When they show up and they're ready to monitor and you're still in your car, or gee, you forgot about it, or well, that's not going to work. And this was discussed in the last one. That's going to be a $50 fee for us to get you rescheduled. Okay, so not good. We're paying that instructor. Somebody's going to pay that instructor, and that's going to be you. So remember, you're the one that sets the dates and the times. We're then going to your date and time, and you're not ready. So nope, not going to work. So make sure when you schedule it, you put it on your calendars. Any questions, let us know ahead of time. Certainly if an emergency comes up, that's understandable. We need to know that emergency. And so there are some exceptions to that. Certainly if you got the flu, you're sick, just came down with something, those things happen. Okay, so that's understandable. But to literally come up and say, oh, I got a party going on and I forgot, no, that's not acceptable. Okay? Again, a little common sense here. We will also try setting the newsletter out again. The pods have kind of taken the place of that newsletter, but in reality, we need to send both. So remember that it's your responsibility when we do this to watch the podcast and watch the newsletter. The interesting thing about me saying that is the fact that if you're watching this now, you're probably one of our regular folks that do watch the podcast and do read the newsletters. What's interesting is I just had a call the other day in reference to what are these things called memberships. Why am I getting a membership? Well, that's been discussed for 2 years. And how are you asking me now what a membership is? Or why are you asking me now how do you get a card off the website? So that's things like, obviously you haven't been paying attention to the newsletters or obviously the podcast. Again, we're in the process of trimming the instructors that don't want to do the job. Your whole purpose of this is saving lives, and if you're doing this because you're going to make a fast buck, that's really not what this is about. This is all about saving lives, making a difference. That makes a difference long before EMS arrives at the location. If you've got something going, we've got a chance to make the difference when we come through the door. If everybody's standing around looking at the patient, we're not going to make a difference. And yes, remember, we're still teaching compressions and ventilations. Compression and ventilation. We're not teaching compression only. Okay. The other thing in reference to the AED, which keeps coming up again, is remember, and you can look this up, whatever AED you're currently using, not a trainer, the real ones, go online, download their manual, or just look at it online. Control F brings up find, type in the word motion, and it will come up in their operations manual that the device itself has to be absolutely steady during this entire procedure. You can't move it, you can't put your knee up against it, you can't lift it, and if you're beginning compressions, the odds are you're going to move that machine, or the machine's going to detect that the rhythm has changed. It will then shut off. It will say motion detected and turn off. I don't understand why people don't know this, because who's ever teaching go back to compressions while the machine's in? No. It's going to detect motion, good possibility, and shut off. And then you have to start all over again. Not really understanding why somebody's done this without even understanding how the AEDs work. Okay? So no. it's only a matter of seconds that it actually analyzes, prepares, and shocks. Those few seconds, it's a safety factor. Do not touch the patient. Okay, as soon as it shocks, then right back into CPR. Okay, that pretty much wraps it up for this session. Again, it's a new year. Let's see if we can go forth and kind of triple our training factor. Even I realize there's problems out there with all the fake CPR still online. We can't seem to get that off. Do your best to explain to people that they are fake classes, that is not real CPR, and certainly that's not any type of certification. Okay, so listen, have a good year. I'll be back again next month with another monitor as another, well, monitors and podcast. So if you get a chance, if you think of something, give us a call, let us know. We'll go ahead and put it into the podcast and get it out to everybody. Okay, thanks again. Thanks for watching the podcast for January 2020.